Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, exploring our latest report, Our Captive Cousins. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Devan, and I'm a campaigns associate with Born Free USA. Born Free is a wild animal welfare and conservation organization. We believe that all wildlife belongs in the wild, free from harm imposed by humans. Today, we will be discussing our newest report on the plight of great apes in zoos, and we are delighted to welcome our expert panelists, Liz Tyson, Jenny Desmond, and Ian Redmond. Before we get started, I'd like to share some information with our attendees. Please feel free to use the chat function throughout the webinar to share your thoughts and to stay engaged throughout the presentations. If you have a question that you would like our panelists to answer, please use the Q&A function and we will try our best to get to it after we have finished all of the presentations. The timing of this webinar is, of course, bittersweet with the very recent passing of Jane Goodall. Many of us on this call, including myself, have been inspired to study, save, and protect these amazing animals because of her inspiring life work dedicated to apes. We hope that we can continue to honor her legacy by speaking out for our cousins who remain in captivity and exploited for human use today. So let's shift to the main reason why you're all here today, the presentations. Let's get started with our first panelist, Liz Tyson, who is Born Free USA's Director of Animal Welfare and Advocacy. Liz has more than 2 decades of working with and for wild animals and has a particular focus on primates. She will be sharing the findings of our newest research as the lead author. So I'll hop off camera and Liz, you can take it away.
Thank you so much, Devan. Thanks everyone for being here. It's really exciting to have you all here and taking time out of your day. My role in this presentation really is just to give you kind of a broad context of what we're talking about here. I'm going to give you a bit of history, a little bit of data about what the landscape of great apes and zoos look like, and then just really point out some of the main health and welfare issues. And that hopefully will lay the groundwork for our expert panelists, Jenny and Ian, to then follow on and share their fantastic, very interesting knowledge with you. So let's start off with the history of great apes in zoos. The first great ape recorded in a zoo was Tommy. He was a chimpanzee held captive at London Zoo in the UK in 1836. And he, like so many other apes who were brought into zoos at that time, died before he was a year old. He died 6 months after his arrival. Apes in zoos at that time were dressed in human clothes and presented as kind of comical or ridiculous. And in fact, that practice continued into really recent years, particularly with their exploitation in the media. Now, like Tommy, who was in London Zoo, the earliest apes in zoos were captured from the wild and died young. Some didn't even make it to their destination and died in transit. So when they were taken for these zoos, they will have been taken from their mothers, from their family groups, and usually the adults would be killed in the process because, of course, like all primates, including humans, you do not let go of your children easily. And in fact, Jenny has direct experience of that still happening, not for the zoo trade, but for the pet trade. Unfortunately, while CITES convention put a stop to a lot of imports of wild animals for exhibition, there is evidence that great apes have been captured from the wild for zoos as recently as 2003. And right now, there are at least 3,000 great apes in zoos globally and more than 22,000 other species of primates, including monkeys and prosimians. But today, we're really focused on great apes. Excuse me, I have a cough. So species spotlights, I'm just going to give you some really fast data. And a lot of this is really focused on longevity and life expectancy in zoos. Now, when you hear about great apes in zoos, the zoo narrative is very common and very kind of uniform. They talk about great apes in the wild living shorter lives because they live in a more dangerous environment. They might be subject to poaching, habitat degradation, scarcity, all of these things. And the statement often goes that great apes in zoos live until their 50s or 60s. The data doesn't actually support that in any significant scale. So most recently available public records count 263 individual chimpanzees in North American zoos. Of those, nearly a quarter of the historic population were wild caught, so those babies being taken away from their mothers, the mothers and family being killed. Of the historic population, more than half died before adulthood. So this is the population in zoos, and I'm calling adulthood here 10, which is actually young, so it's on the younger side. But if we say 10 is adulthood, more than half died before that age. The average age at death for the historic population in zoos is just 13.5 years old. Now, age at death has increased over the years, which you would expect as husbandry and we learn more about animal health and welfare. But the median age at death in zoos between 2000 and 2012 was still just under 30 years old. Bearing in mind the lifespan of chimps could be into 50s and 60s, then that's approximately half of their potential lifespan. And as I say, while zoos talk about these animals living for very long periods in zoos, often into their 50s, etc., only 3 individuals of the living population were more than 50 years old. Next slide, please. Looking now at orangutans, even more disturbing picture. So 279 individuals, more than a quarter of the historic population were wild caught. 43% died before adulthood in zoos, and the average age at death was just 15.32 years. Age at death for this great ape has actually decreased over the years in zoos. We don't really know why that is, but median age at death between 2000 and 2016 was just 5.39 years old. And wild orangutans have estimated lifespans of 35 to 40 years, and again claims that captive orangutans live beyond 50 up to 60. In fact, of the entire historic population, only 12 individuals have lived beyond 50, and none have lived beyond 60 years old. Next slide. And finally, looking at the Western lowland gorillas, so the other very commonly kept great ape in zoos, and in fact, the most populous in zoos, 346 gorillas in North American zoos. A third of that historic population were wild caught. Almost half died before adulthood. This is the pattern that we keep seeing. And the average age of death was 15 years, or 15.76 years. Age at death has, again, like chimpanzees, increased over the years, but the median age remains at 30. And of the living population, only 1 individual was more than 50 years old. And this is important because what we're seeing here is that great apes are either living less, shorter lifespans than they would in the wild, and they're certainly not living to their potential lifespans. So you would have thought, we should be able to think that in zoos where zoos claim they receive better care, they receive veterinary care, they don't have those challenges of the wild. It's really disturbing to see that these captive great apes are dying well before their normal life expectancy. So moving on to the next slide, here are some of the things that contribute to that. So the major health and welfare concerns, and I'm just touching on these, and I know that Jenny and Ian may kind of delve a little bit more into them. So lack of appropriate social groupings. So all great apes, all primates like humans have really complex societies. And they may live in large communities. Those communities may be broken up into smaller groups, whether defined by family, friendships. They may separate due to particular resource allocation. They might just fall out and have conflict and move away into and out of a group. And that simply cannot be replicated in zoos, either in number of individuals or in the way that these, particularly for chimpanzees, these kind of what are called fission fusion societies operate. Enclosure size and design is honestly abysmal in zoos. We're doing a project at the moment where we visit some of the leading zoos in the US, and I can hand on heart say that every time we go, the spaces allocated to the great apes for their entire lifetimes are always smaller than the children's playground at the zoo. So these spaces, they might have a climbing frame, they might have an indoor room, but when we think that these animals traverse huge spaces in the wild and really complex, dynamic, and challenging environments, then zoos simply cannot come close to meeting those environmental needs. We see diet and obesity issues that wouldn't be seen in the diet, and perhaps as a direct result of that, or certainly contributing to that, is the huge prevalence of cardiovascular disease. So nearly half of bonobo deaths, 41% of gorilla deaths, and 20% of orangutan deaths come from cardiovascular disease, something which is nearly absent in wild populations. Conflict, talking about those social groupings, like I say, they become friends, they find enemies, they have conflict, and those conflicts may be long term, they might be temporary. There's a lot of kind of hierarchical positioning, posturing in great ape society. So conflict is entirely predictable in these communities and these societies. And what happens in zoos is when these conflicts occur, the animals can't get away. They've got nowhere to go. They can't fission or fusion their way in or out of anything. And so what that ends up with is injury and sometimes death. So two examples, Renee, a chimpanzee killed during a fight at Edinburgh Zoo. The news report said that their caregivers did everything they could to break up the fight, but once it starts, there really isn't anything that you can do, and Renee lost her life because of it. And then Tiny, a 7-month-old gorilla who was killed by a silverback at London Zoo. And this speaks to the inability of great apes in captivity to make choices for their own relationships. This happened. Tiny was killed while a silverback was being introduced to his mother. Now, these two adult gorillas had not made a decision to meet, to mate, to do any of these things. And so, again, these kind of contrived and forced relationships put the animals in significant danger. Finally, extensive evidence of stress-related behaviors known as stereotypies are really prevalent in primate species, not just great apes, but also monkeys and prosimians. And these look like baseless, repetitive behaviors, which are the kind of manifestation of compounded internal stress. That might be pacing, spinning, self-harming, self-grasping, regurgitating and re-ingesting food, amongst other things. And there is a very high prevalence of these behaviors in great apes in zoos. And importantly, like the cardiovascular disease, these are things that are not witnessed in free living groups. And then my penultimate slide, real quick so I don't go over my time, it's not just a sad and life of suffering for the apes in zoos. There's also really serious human health and safety issues here. When apes threaten human safety, quite frankly, they're killed. 4 chimps were killed in Sweden when they escaped their enclosure in 2022. And it's predictable that these incredibly strong, incredibly smart, problem-solving animals will, from time to time, escape their enclosures. Harambe, I think we all know Harambe's story. He was killed after a young boy fell into his enclosure. And in instances like this, there isn't really the option to say tranquilize the animals safely, because the tranquilization takes too long to take effect. And so killing them is literally the only way that humans will be kept safe from them in those kind of incidents. And it's not just deaths or those kind of serious incidents where the animals are killed or a human is killed. Born Free has tracked 31 instances of captive primates attacking humans since 1996. And those are only incidents that have been publicly reported in English. So that's probably really conservative. Of those, 6 people had fingers bitten off, 2 people were critically injured, 1 requiring surgery. 9 biting incidents included children. So even being in proximity, close proximity to great apes and other primates in zoos is dangerous, and it's well documented and known. Finally, the zoonotic disease risk, so diseases that can be passed between humans and non-human animals, include tuberculosis, respiratory illness, herpes B, COVID-19, and measles, amongst other things. And then my final slide, this was a really whirlwind tour, but I hope it's just given some context to the really fantastic discussion that's going to come. So in summary, when we ask the question, should great apes be held captive in zoos? We would argue no, because in zoos, great apes suffer decreased longevity, limited and unnatural social opportunities, stress and related illnesses. They are killed if they escape, and sometimes even when they don't. And in addition, they're not released to the wild, and experts confirm that captive breeding serves no meaningful conservation purpose. So that rounds up my presentation. I'm going to hand back to Devan to pass over to the wonderful Jenny Desmond, who's going to share her work with you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Liz. A lot of that is difficult to hear, but really important for us to know. So thank you for that. So now let's welcome our second panelist, Jenny Desmond. She is an animal welfare and conservation consultant who provides guidance and support in a variety of capacities to international private and not-for-profit organizations. She is co-founder of Liberia Chimpanzee Rescue and Protection in West Africa. So Jenny, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I was on mute. I'm going to talk about phasing great apes out of zoos and to take kind of the next step from what Liz was just speaking about. Looking to the future, I like to really think about how we can talk about this issue, because it shouldn't be something that's contradictory and people fighting and arguing over it. It should be something that we can partner together and collaborate and come up with some solutions. When we look at all of those issues that Liz was talking about and some of the issues I'll talk about today, I just want to preface this presentation by saying it's not intended to be combative. It's intended to start discussions and come up with innovative ideas for change. Next slide. I wanted to talk about great ape rights. There are 5 freedoms for animal welfare. And we kind of wonder, can zoos realistically and adequately give this to great apes? This is for all animals, but particularly we know great apes with their socially complex needs and their health needs and their longevity it's very difficult for zoos to meet these needs. Number 1 is freedom from hunger and thirst. 2, freedom from discomfort, freedom from pain, injury, or disease, and freedom to express normal behavior. And the final one is freedom from fear and distress. And I think Liz just touched on kind of all of those. And it immediately tells us that these zoos, many of these zoos cannot meet these needs. Next slide. I want to talk next about damaging perceptions. We in this field, we all who work with chimpanzees and or other great apes and primates, we fight very hard to change perceptions of the public. Liz was talking about the early chimpanzees and other great apes were dressed. They were, as probably most of us have seen, they were MTV shows and commercials, and there was a lot of people thinking they're funny, cute, not dignified. Comedy was utilized chimpanzees quite a bit in the early days. And we also see that zoos promote babies and captivity and handling. When zoos intentionally breed and they have their babies, they put them all over social media in terms of excitement, and they get people to come to the zoo to visit and see them. Whereas for sanctuaries and other groups like ours, we don't look at that way. We're trying to think that it's sad when a baby comes. We of course celebrate that the baby is rescued, and we do share about the baby story, but we do not want to talk to people about, yes, it's great to have them in captivity. It's great to handle them. It's great to have them as pets. They promote their baby ape pictures, promote pets, the perpetuation of primates as cute and cuddly, which is something we all work hard to fight against. And they promote babies who must be hand raised for cute. They talk about it being cute and fun, where it really isn't cute and fun. It just means that babies very often have to be hand raised in zoos. We also concern that they promote trade perception and exploitation. Zoos trade, breed, and legally traffic apes, which again, it's legal in many cases with legitimate zoos, but we feel that it promotes objectification, promotes apes as pets, and covers for illegal trade. Some former zoo traders we know are now underground in the black market because they have expertise in trading great apes and other wildlife. Zoos often have ambassadors and breeders. So wildlife who serves as breeders for new babies, and ambassadors. So we'll see sometimes animals who are used to educate, but they're really being used as ambassadors and kind of sacrificial. And some zoos, non-legitimate ones, use babies as props and money makers. Next slide. Breeding of great apes in zoos, for me, this is really the key topic and the focus for all that we do, because I think most of us on this call, at least of the panel, feel that we should immediately just stop breeding in zoos, stop the breeding of great apes in zoos. It's unethical, it's unnecessary, and it's unkind. And we don't feel it serves the stated purposes. As Liz mentioned, there are some certain statements that are made by zoos in terms of why they should be breeding great apes in zoos. And what we found is that zoos have been kind of assigned, great apes have been assigned by zoos to propagate their kind. Again, as Liz said, we're forcing this on them. We're forcing relationships on these chimpanzees who are just like humans. It's like telling one of us that we have to marry this person, or we have to have a child with this person. We have to raise this child. We have to be with people who we may not like or get along with. But this is propagated through breeding, and the breeding isn't done based on what the chimpanzees would want or their choice. It's done based on what the zoo population needs or desires. And I think one of the things that we talk about is that the infants very often through breeding are either stillborn, or they die in utero, or they die after they're born from injuries, from injuries that are inflicted by other members, or a baby can be dropped or hurt, or they're hand raised, so they're taken away from the mothers because the mother isn't comfortable taking care of the baby or isn't giving proper care, and they're taken away. And when they are hand raised, sanctuaries, of course, are constantly hand raising chimpanzees and other great apes. We can't obviously be their mothers, but we can at least try and simulate and replicate what their mothers would do at a sanctuary, whereas zoos are really not able to do that. They're hand raised, they're passed around to multiple carers, and they're made to sleep on their own very often, not held and carried around the clock like they would be with their great ape mothers in the wild. Zoos intentionally breed individuals into the world to spend 50 to 60 years or 30 to 60 years inside an enclosure. They will not leave the zoo. That is very, very unlikely. And so we just call for an immediate halt on reproduction in zoos, grandfather great apes out, and there would be many decades left of these great apes in zoos until or unless we can find them sanctuary homes. Next. Sorry, next slide. These are just, I'm going to kind of touch on these, and hopefully we can talk about some of these in the Q&A at the end. But the arguments against apes and zoos are just plentiful. There are so many. There's messaging. I've talked about some of this. Hurts conservation messaging. I feel it really. The chimpanzees and other great apes lose respect and dignity by being in zoos. No pets messaging. We try so hard to tell people that they do not make good pets, but I think when people see them in captivity in zoos and they're acting funny, or they're behind bars or windows, it really has people thinking that they make good pets, or they're cute or funny or silly, and promotes babies. Genetics. Zoos very often speak of genetics and genetic diversity. We feel that can be better served in sanctuaries. We have quite a bit of genetic diversity. We are in the native range states, and we are able to maintain cultural traits, which are lost in zoos. Mental and physical health, we can do that in sanctuaries much better than a zoo is able. And one of the other things is health, and Liz talked about it. So many major health issues in generationally captive chimpanzees. The stress they have, the movement back and forth, the relocation, the location where they live, the environment where they live is not suitable, and they often get diseases or sickness from all of those issues. Breeding, we talked about breeding. Dignity, again, we feel that it's not dignified. It's like keeping humans in a cage and watching them and making fun of them, or even if we do it in a way that we're trying to make it dignified. It's very, very difficult to do that in a zoo where the chimpanzees or the great apes have to stay in these cages for their lifetimes behind bars. Impression of critically endangered status. We do know through research that people often think that if they see chimpanzees on TV or commercials, or sometimes in zoos, they don't understand that they are actually endangered. And I've been to quite a few zoos with great apes and seen that the education, in my experience, is very low, very limited, and we don't really hear what we're supposed to be hearing about their endangered status and their needs. So I think that the awareness and education component is very limited. And the pet trade. Again, we feel it fuels through the legal trade, because there is trade at zoos that is legal, but it confuses the messaging of not trading in great apes. Next slide. Sorry, these are coming like this. Again, commodities. Having been with legal zoo brokers myself, I have heard conversations that made it very clear that wildlife in zoos and through breeders and traders is often seen, viewed, discussed as commodities. Funding. Zoos talk very frequently about supporting conservation. We know that the percentage is very small. We also know that many enclosures have cost millions and millions to support. And as Liz said, they're still not adequate, but they can spend, one zoo recently spent close to 40 million on a new great ape enclosure. So we feel that why do that? Why not spend on conservation and support conservation with great apes actually not in zoos? We feel that that's something that's achievable. Group dynamics, small groups, confinement, inability to properly manage groups and friendships and relationships and conflict. When you restructure groups, this happens at sanctuaries as well and rescue centers. When you restructure the group, however, it's something that we can manage. It usually involves a very simple move or relocation and an integration process. At a zoo, it generally means relocation to another zoo, another state, another country, and intensive reintegration. You can imagine when you think of chimpanzees feeling the way we do about their families and their friends, how stressful and terrifying that must be. And again, relocation trauma, based on zoo needs, wants, finances, not based on chimpanzee choice or need. Sometimes chimpanzees and other great apes, saying chimpanzees, all great apes, can be euthanized because either an injury or danger to the public, or sometimes there's overpopulation, and we don't hear a lot about that. Great apes are long-lived, as Liz mentioned. Each baby begins a new cycle of decades-long captivity. And this is something that we really think about, that when babies are born, the zoo celebrates it. People that work in our field and sanctuaries do not celebrate the birth of a baby. We, of course, try and not have breeding in zoos, in our sanctuaries. Sometimes we have accidental births, and of course we take care of those babies, but we acknowledge that that's not a good way to run sanctuaries, and it's certainly not a good way to run zoos, so that we're promising these individuals decades of captivity. So what I'd like to just kind of close on is I have a couple other slides, but primarily that we think that these can be transitioned out, that great apes can be transitioned out. We feel that if you stop the breeding immediately, and then we don't basically take individuals, don't relocate them to zoos, but relocate them to sanctuaries whenever possible, eventually we would grandfather great apes out of zoos. And I think in the interim, with these decades in between now and then, we have plenty of time to work on what the solutions might be in terms of continuing the benefits of zoos without having great apes in them. Next slide. I've mentioned sanctuaries a lot. Obviously, I'm the founder of Liberia Chimpanzee Rescue and Protection, and we are a sanctuary in West Africa. And basically, we feel that sanctuaries are a wonderful alternative to zoos. Rescue centers have thousands of great apes, all ages, varied behaviors, varied genetics, personalities, cultural traits, and sanctuaries are able to maintain that. We have first generation chimpanzees directly from the wild. They are in their native range. Most sanctuaries have an environment that's semi-natural and forests. So the chimpanzees and other great apes, like the chimpanzees here and other great ape sanctuaries, are able to keep these behaviors that they would use in the wild. Sometimes they find their foods they would still find in the wild. So we're maintaining this level of wildness, so that if it ever became possible to release them or reintroduce them to the wild, the sanctuaries are far better positioned to do that than a zoo. Rescue centers also are frontline conservation. We move support for all kinds of activities that promote great ape conservation on the front lines in the countries where we work. And we know the communities, we know the governments, we know the other organizations and NGOs here. And it's just a way to do great ape conservation in real time versus zoos kind of trying to stretch and help people to understand. It's a win-win for everyone. Final slide, I think. Yeah, I just wanted to say again, to reiterate, partnering to support innovative change. That's really how I want to look at this webinar and this report. I feel there are so many things we can do, and I think the zoos can work with us to do this. I'm guessing there are a lot of people who are caregivers for great apes and primates at zoos who would rather see them in sanctuaries, in more natural environments, and able to interact and have choice and be with friends and choose, basically choose what their days are like, and not be stared at by other people. So I just saying, let's make the choice to phase great apes out of zoos, support rescue centers and sanctuaries and conservation organizations, because again, we are truly able to save species and populations on the front lines. Let's commit in educating in more creative ways. I think we can push ourselves. Look at the technology we have today. I mean, you think of kids in this generation, they love technology and games. There are so many ways we can educate and raise awareness without kids needing to see these great apes in the zoo, where it doesn't even give them the right understanding of them anyway. Focus on fully keeping wild animal individuals and populations wild, and support frontline organizations. And redirect funding to the protection and conservation of wildlife where they live. Again, we are on the front lines. We are able to do the work. We know what's required and what's necessary and what's needed, and certainly could partner with organizations in other parts of the world to make that more effective. Let's redirect our energy and dollars to those actively fighting wildlife crime and already operating conservation and reintroduction programs on the ground. And let's clearly message that great apes deserve full dignity, liberty, and respect. I just like to finish with, we're an amazing species with the capacity for making progressive decisions affecting lasting change. And so I want to end on a positive note. I think we are capable of doing this and making this change, and I think we should do it as soon as we possibly can. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jenny, for that messaging. And you brought up a great point that viewing animals in artificial environments like zoos will inevitably teach people the wrong things about these animals. So very important to know. So finally, we'll welcome our last panelist, Ian Redmond. Ian is a wildlife biologist and conservationist renowned for his work with apes and elephants. He served as an ambassador for the UN Year of the Gorilla in 2009, and from 2010 to the present for the UN's Convention on Migratory Species. Ian is a policy advisor to our sister organization based in the United Kingdom, Born Free Foundation. So I'll turn it over to you, Ian.
Thank you. Thank you. That was a tour de force of the problems that face apes in captivity. And I think the more enlightened zoos are very, very aware of those problems and work to mitigate them, but within the context of it's okay to keep apes in captivity, away from their homeland. So sanctuaries within the great apes range states. And there are 21 countries in Africa with great apes and 2 in Southeast Asia. And the 21 in Africa are the chimpanzee range states, 10 of which also have gorillas, and 1 of which, the Democratic Republic of Congo, also has bonobos, or pygmy or gracile chimpanzees, as they're sometimes known. So across Africa and across the forested islands of Southeast Asia, apes are not just ornaments. They're not just nice things to see if you have enough money to go on holiday to Africa or Southeast Asia. They're critically important components of the forest ecosystem. And however closely you read the little signs on zoo enclosures, I don't think those signs, even if they're well written, and some of them aren't, but let's just go with the ones that are well written, they're saying one thing, but your eyes are telling you something else. And it's much more impactful what you see and hear and smell and feel than what you read on a little sign. And there's a lot of evidence of studies of the behavior of zoo visitors that shows that not a lot of them read the signs, and if they do, they spend a very, very short time in front of each enclosure. So their experience of the ape is of a curious ornament that you can go and see in a convenient collection and walk by one after another, rather like a natural history museum, but with living exhibits. Now, the idea I would like to get across to every visitor to a zoo, and ideally every person who doesn't go to a zoo because they understand this difference, is that apes and indeed other wild animals, are not ornaments. They are components of ecosystems. Now, I also have a passion for industrial archaeology, and I like going to museums. But if you go to a museum to see machines, and all you were to be shown was cogs on the wall, maybe going round and round, but not connecting and not performing the function that they were designed to perform in a machine, then I think you'd be pretty disappointed in that museum. You want to see living, working museum pieces that are examples of perhaps machines of the 19th century. And when you go to a zoo, what you're essentially seeing is living cogs, just going round and round an enclosure with no purpose in life. Now, if they are kept in social groups, then they have some opportunity for interaction sort of within a family. But societies, whether they're human or non-human, are built up of more than families. It's the interaction between the families, between the communities, that create a lot of the interest in their life. And however big the zoo enclosures, they are not big enough for natural interactions between social groups. So right from the outset, although the zoo industry has learned how to keep great apes alive, which they didn't do for the first nearly 100 years of their being brought to captivity, and to breed them, and as you've learned from Liz's presentation, the majority of great apes in captivity now are captive born. And that begs a bigger question in evolutionary thinking, because natural selection is still happening. It's just different selective pressures are being put on captive populations. And the apes that don't do well in captivity either die young or create such a problem that they're sent somewhere else and passed around like I don't know, problem children. Where do you find a school that will look after a child that has special needs? Well, ideally, you integrate them into the normal school. But if that school can't cope because of the difficulties, then they get sent somewhere else for special treatment. There aren't, well, I suppose you could say a sanctuary is a place for apes where they get special treatment. They're treated as individuals. They're not a commodity to be displayed to the public. And their welfare is uppermost in the minds of their carers. But in captivity in a sanctuary, although they won't be breeding, they still don't have a full life. And I would like every being on the planet, human and non-human, to have a fulfilled life, to achieve their potential. The gorillas behind me, it's a family of mountain gorillas in Rwanda. They are the children and grandchildren of the gorillas that I studied there in the 70s with the late Diane Fossey. And that experience of living for 2 or 3 years in a forest, going each day and observing families of gorillas taking their own decisions, seeing them as autonomous beings, and seeing their infants grow up with a rich and quite long childhood during which they learn the rules of gorilla society as their parents and conspecifics see it. And when they learn about selecting and preparing food items, it's by observing initially their mother, because usually they're in the lap of their mother as she's feeding, and then perhaps observing other individuals. But gorillas tend to spread out to feed, so they're not seeing so much of what other gorillas are doing when they're older. It's during those formative years, and those are the years where, if a baby ape is captured from the wild, the parents are killed, and the number of other gorillas that die to get one infant ape into the hands of a skilled enough person to keep the baby alive is quite frightening. At least 2 adults are going to die in the capture, and very often the baby dies too. So every time an infant dies, that's 3 baby and 2 adults taken from the population. But with gorillas in particular, they're very sensitive as infants. It's hard to keep them alive when they lose their parents. They're traumatized. And so it's quite common for them to die. And when I did a study in the late 80s of the trade in captive apes in Congo Brazzaville, the most skilled person looking after baby apes to rescue them from the trade was losing 4 out of 5, which means that 14 apes had died for every infant she had. So it's a scary statistic. And the number of apes in captivity that come from the wild is now diminished. But let's just return to that thought about natural selection. In captivity, the kind of characteristics which might be ideal for an ape living in the wild, having good reasoning skills, having decision-making skills, are not relevant in captivity. All your decisions, your life decisions, your daily decisions are taken by your keepers. What you need to survive in captivity is to be docile, to just accept what happens to you. And those individuals that manage that can live to a greater age than has been recorded in most instances in the wild. There is one chimpanzee in a long-term study site that was thought to live to 70. That's a wild chimpanzee who took her own decisions throughout her life. So it's not impossible for wild apes to live many decades too. But those that do so in captivity are those that can accept the constraints on their behavior, the constant frustrations, the perpetual desire to do something and being thwarted by a wall, by a keeper, by a lack of privacy, by the constant gaze of humans. All that is, I think, providing a low-level stress. And those that can cope with that stress are the ones that will survive. And if they breed, then their infants are likely to carry the traits of captive survival. Now we're now having generation after generation breed in captivity. And you have to start to question the ethics of keeping autonomous beings, self-aware, cognitively able beings in captivity, generation after generation, in what is effectively a yard. Sometimes it's a yard with some enrichment. Sometimes it's got some trees in it, but they're all got hot wires around them, so the apes can't climb them, can't do what apes naturally do. They're left with a climbing frame and perhaps a moat. And they sit for hours thinking, and we don't know what they're thinking about. But I think it is low-level stress and frustration for much of the time. And that's perhaps why so many of them die of heart disease, of diseases that we associate with modern civilized human society. We have domesticated ourselves and we suffer the consequences of that way of life. And we're imposing that on generation after generation of captive apes. And while they're in captivity, effectively, they're unemployed. The gorillas behind me are gardeners of the forest. Hashtag gardeners of the forest. Look up all sorts of videos and articles about the role that gorillas and other apes, and indeed elephants and other keystone species play in their habitats. And that's not just a nice thing to know is going on. It's not just of academic interest. The habitats of the great apes in Africa and Southeast Asia and the other primates around the tropic zone of our planet, those primates and elephants are keystone species in the ecosystems that maintain our biosphere. The biosphere is just a thin layer of gas and water on the surface of the big ball of rock. You know, people want to save the world. The world's fine. It's a ball of rock. It's the thin film of livable space in which we humans and every other living thing exist. And the life support mechanism for the biosphere seems to be mightily affected by the tropical forests of Latin America, of the Congo Basin in West Africa, and of Southeast Asia. We depend on those ecosystems. And yet, despite repeated commitments by our political leaders and the slow changing of our corporate leaders, deforestation is continuing. And yet our greenhouse gas emissions and pollution and other stresses on nature are increasing. So we're asking more and more of less and less of nature. So it seems to me the message that zoos should be is it was a natural thing of our human curiosity to bring animals to show people. Now we have virtual tourism. Go to vicotourism.org and you can take a trip virtually to ape habitat. We've got videos galore on YouTube. You've got specialist channels like EcoFlix. Sign up to EcoFlix and learn about apes and their ecological role. but leave them in the wild. And those that are in captivity, as Jenny says, let's work out a plan to take them off exhibit so they're not constantly stressed by human gaze. And for those that are capable, let's think of areas of natural habitat which have lost their apes. They've lost the gardeners of the forest. The forest is less productive without those apes. And let's think of ways, just as the Aspinall Foundation is doing. The only 2 zoos that are putting apes back in the wild are the ones run by the Aspinall Foundation. And we'll start putting the gorilla back into the ecosystem, putting the orangutan back into the ecosystem. And that will improve the efficiency of those forests, and it will help combat climate change and biodiversity loss, and it will give the individual animals a better quality of life back in their natural habitat where they belong. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian. I loved your point about how those complex reasoning skills that great apes have is unfortunately the part that makes it so difficult for them in captivity. So thank you so much for your presentation. So we'd now like to welcome back all of our panelists on screen to answer some questions from the audience. So I am going to go ahead and read Maria's question. Maria said that she went to the Bronx Zoo a couple of years ago and watching the apes in captivity broke her heart. The behaviors they displayed made it so clear that they are bored doing things because humans are watching. And she's wondering what can I do besides never go back to any zoo? So I'll direct that question to Liz first.
And hi, thank you. Yeah, great question. I think apart from not going to the zoo, I do think that that is an important action to take. I think, we have a public perception of zoos being beneficial to animals, of serving conservation, of creating educational opportunities, but increasingly research like ours is showing that that isn't necessarily the case. You listen to Jenny, you listen to Ian sharing their knowledge and experience. I think a big part of what we need to do is educate our own communities about this. And then I think also what's really gonna drive change is alternatives, because people go to the zoo to fill a Saturday afternoon with their family. And I think, there's all this new technology coming up. Devan and I actually went to a hologram zoo a couple of months ago with my toddler daughter, and it was amazing. We could reach out and touch the animals. We could get right into their ecosystems. The one we went to was a little bit rough around the edges, but I think that's going to be the key to change is alternatives. And like Ian says, ecoflicks, like being able to access real great ape habitats and see them living their own lives. I think we just need to step back from this idea that we're somehow entitled to see them in real life. And I think if we can move past that, we can learn so much about them and have a great time doing it.
And I must, if I can just jump in as well.
Of course.
I'm glad you mentioned the Bronx Zoo, Maria, because that is home to the Wildlife Conservation Society, which is the new name for the New York Zoological Society, which has to be recognized as one of the most effective conservation organizations on the planet. Not from what they're doing in the Bronx Zoo, but from what their staff do running national parks all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
So credit where it's due. There are some zoos which are the basis for a conservation organization that is doing real conservation. But they don't have to keep apes in captivity to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And if they would phase out the living animals and convert those enclosures to virtual experiences, you still have a centre of zoological excellence and study. You'd still have a nice day out for the kids, but it would be more tech rather than animal suffering. And I think because of modern technology, one of the things I see a lot on social media is members of the public who are showing pictures of their family or of interesting things to an ape, and the ape is signaling next, next, next. And it's so obvious communication. Now, if you find one of those, go through the comments, because the comments are from the members of the public who weren't there and are disturbed by the idea that we are getting fun out of interacting with a sentient being who's behind glass in an enclosure, not through having committed a crime, just through being interesting to humans. So I think public opinion is changing, and it's technology that's allowing them to see the cognitive powers of the apes that are being kept, and the elephants and the whales and dolphins, all these large-brained sentient mammals do not belong in captivity. Coupled with my ecological argument, they've got a job to do in a forest or an ocean somewhere, pick the appropriate habitat for the species, and that's a much more enlightened understanding of them, and that's what we have to drive for.
Can I just quickly also say that personal experience with the rescue center that we run, people are enthralled with, as Ian's talking and Liz, seeing the stories unfold through their social media platforms. I mean, they are so bonded and attached to the babies we've rescued, and love to watch them grow up and see how they get to go back to the forest and have friends, other chimpanzee friends, and get to make choices and eat exciting foods and continue to learn cultural traits like cracking nuts, which is something that Western chimpanzees do. And I think our experience has really been that is enough for most people. And I think if we look at that, and then like Liz was saying, and I know Ian does a lot with this, with technology the way it is, I mean, it is just something that we can work on. This hologram zoo, I think kids would prefer that in many cases. Most kids tell me, and even adults who were kids at zoos, that they did not like being at zoos. They liked seeing animals, but they did not like being at zoos.
Yeah, very true, Jenny. So I guess sort of a follow-up question to the work that you do, Jenny. I'm curious what you would want the general public to know about what the most challenging part of rescuing chimpanzees is from exploitative and traumatic situations with humans. What do you wish people knew about the process of rescue and the ending result that happens whenever you do make a rescue?
Sorry. I think what I'd really like people to understand, and I think we talked about it today, the longevity of these chimpanzees or other great apes, they're living decades. They're going to be most of them will be in lifetime care at the rescue centers. Many are traumatized. They come in with broken limbs. They come in with shrapnel in their bodies. They are psychologically extremely traumatized. They require intensive care. I think a lot of people don't understand that, as Ian mentioned, the mothers and the families are killed to get the babies. So I think that's important for people to know. And just understanding that rescue centers aren't just rescuing individuals, but they are maintaining cultures and relationships and group dynamics and giving this freedom and choice. And they're also, as I mentioned in my presentation, very well positioned for reintroduction and release where it can be done. And I think that's a really important thing to realize.
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. A question for anyone who wants to jump in, if anyone has experience with this. Sam asked, how receptive have you found zoos are to phasing out great apes? So I'm curious if any of our panelists have had any discussions directly with zoos or people that work at zoos about that.
Ian, I think you'd be a good one to jump on that. Forgive me for putting you on the spot.
No, it's the concept of phasing out great apes is surprisingly recently being talked about. It has been talked about with elephants and cetaceans. And in the UK, there are no cetaceans, no whales and dolphins in captivity. They weren't banned from being kept in captivity, but the government passed such stringent regulations for the conditions that they must be kept in that it became uneconomical to build a facility that could provide what whales and dolphins need. And by whales, we're usually talking about orca, which are toothed whales, killer whales, not the baleen whales. I don't think anyone's kept them in captivity. But cetaceans are being phased out in various places, and some of them are even getting to go back to at least a natural habitat sanctuary in a cove with a fence across, and ultimately perhaps back into the wild. Elephants, a lot of zoos in the UK have gone out of elephants, as in they used to keep them, now they don't, because they have accepted the arguments that it's not a species that they can provide adequate enclosures for and care for, and social stimulation and all that. So I think we're winning those battles. It's only in I think really the last few months, where Born Free in the UK has brought out a report on great apes in the UK and Europe, and Born Free USA has brought one out on apes in North America, that this call is being made. And the late Jane Goodall, sadly departed only a few days ago, was, although she had done a great deal to help the welfare of apes in captivity, she backed the chimpanzee concept, where captive chimps are given much better environmental enrichment, but it's still environmental enrichment in a yard. It's not being part of an ecosystem. It's not taking your own decisions beyond your immediate daily, deciding what to do when you're let out. And usually then you're told when to go in. So I think Jane recognized the difficulties, but she was trying to unite people. So she wanted people who did work in zoos to work with people who didn't work in zoos for the greater good. And I think that's a strong lesson to work. I liked your appeal, Jenny, to the zoos, but in my experience of visiting zoos, often as a guest speaker, so I get the behind the scene tours, I talk to the keepers, and often the keepers share many of our concerns, but they're not the decision makers. They're told what to do by the management. And the management are often academics. And they have a very deep knowledge of perhaps ape genetics. And it seems to me that in their desire to maintain genetic heterogeneity, that is lots of different genes, they treat captive apes like a pack of cards. We've got to shuffle them. So they mix them all up, and that doesn't respect their relationships. And when I was involved in a custody battle over a gorilla, this was a gorilla who had been taught sign language. I asked the zoo that was asking for the gorilla back, would you consider, listening to the keepers who work with the gorilla every day, or the gorilla's own views? And they wouldn't listen to the keeper's views, let alone the gorilla's views. So this idea that you can actually communicate with a great ape and inquire as to what he or she would like as a choice is pretty much anathema to a zoo, because if you ask them, they probably would say, thanks, but no thanks. I don't want to be in a zoo on public display. I'd like to be in a quiet place with my own kind. And yeah, that's what I think we should work towards. And I think the more people see of the way apes display their cognitive abilities using social media, the more they think this is wrong. This is just ethically unacceptable to keep them behind bars for our pleasure.
Absolutely.
I think also
Yeah.
zoos are trying to breed great apes, and we are constantly hoping we never get another one. It's such a significant
a birth
gap.
in your case, Jenny, a birth in your sanctuary is taking the place of a rescued baby that then can't be rescued
Yeah.
because you've only got so many places.
Exactly.
So shifting gears a little bit, I do really like this question Matt asked in the chat. Is there another danger that if we go down the virtual route, we end up with a world where wildlife only exists in digital form? Heaven forbid. So Liz, would you like to take on that question?
Yeah, sure. I'm going to be real quick because we've just got a few minutes left, but I think that's a really interesting question. So do we care more about animals if we see them in zoos, or do we care more about them if we see them virtually? Because that's really what we're talking about, because we need people to care about animals to support their protection in the wild. And I think one thing that we have learned over many years is that seeing an animal in a zoo does not then link or cause somebody to actively advocate or protect animals in the wild. However, I do think that, we can care very deeply about things without seeing them in real life. A quick example is my toddler is absolutely obsessed with chickens. She loves chickens so much. She has at least 5 toy chickens. She talks about chickens all the time. She's never seen a live chicken in her life. And I think that's a silly example, but we can care deeply about these things without seeing them. And I think when we see them in these really innovative ways, in these really interesting ways, we can engage. We engage with literature, we engage with film, we engage with forms of art in ways that are really profound and meaningful. And I think we can do that. And I think that having indirect contact and new understandings of animals without having them there in person or in real life has more potential
As,
really
as,
to create care.
as Jenny said, it's the stories that capture the imagination.
Agreed.
So imagine a zoo sees this podcast and thinks, okay, let's give it a try. Let's phase it out. Let's take our gorillas and our chimpanzees that all the public in that area love and send them to a sanctuary, but have a closed circuit television link back to the zoo. So the individuals are starting a new life, maybe even back in their country of their species origin, in a natural habitat where they can return to being #gardeners of the forest. Wouldn't that be an amazing story to follow? So I have already challenged 1 or 2 zoos to do this. And I challenge anyone who's watching this, go to your local zoo, say, I love the animals, but I want to see them in a better place. Please send them to where they can fulfill their potential, their species potential, but keep telling us the story through live feed or best of or whatever. And we can follow them on our phone in the palm of our hand, or we can come to the zoo for a 360 experience in the old gorilla enclosure, but we'd be inside looking at them in their natural habitat using virtual reality. I mean, I think it has such potential and it ticks off so many of those boxes.
Yeah, for sure. So we are running out of time. We just reached 2 minutes. Just to close out, I was wondering if every panelist could maybe share like one thing or one mindset that you would hope that anyone watching this webinar, who maybe didn't know a lot about great apes in captivity, would adopt after watching this webinar, just to start initiating some positive change for them. Not to put you on the spot, but Jenny, if you have one ready, like an action or a mindset or just a sentence of wisdom that you would like to share with our viewers before we head out.
Sure. I think just taking all of this and assimilating it into a new attitude and a new way of looking and spreading that word among your own communities and your own families and friends. And as Liz mentioned, your kids, they're the ones who are going to change this. And I think if we can really get this concept out and there are solutions, I think we can do it in the very near future.
Great. Liz, what's yours?
Real quick. I've worked with non-human primates for 22 years. I haven't had the privilege of working directly with great apes, but one thing that is evident is that they are so like us. So I think it's very easy to look at great apes or other primates in captivity and simply ask ourselves, how would I feel in that situation? And if you wouldn't like it, they don't like it.
No, I get it.
Yes. And then Ian, just something
So Liz
that you
just
wanted to
passed
share?
me the ball. I'm going to take it and run with it. Get in touch with your inner ape. We're all primates. We're 99% chimpanzee and bonobo, we're 98% gorilla, 97% orangutan. Go into a forest or a park, sit under a tree, or if you've got the ability, climb into the tree, feel the movement of the branches, and think, this is us. We are primates, and we should be treating our cousins a little bit better than is possible in zoos. And then think, well, what of my daily purchases are actually damaging ape habitat? If you're buying something with palm oil in it, does that company say ours is from sustainable deforestation-free sources? Because if not, now you can whip out your smartphone and send a message to the company saying, I was going to buy your product, but you don't say you're deforestation-free. How many such messages does the media department of some big corporation have to receive before they think we better do this properly? So I often say it's taken 8 billion of us to get into this mess. It's going to take 8 billion of us to get out of it. And every one of us, as Jane would say, make your decisions count. And you watch that last message that Jane left for the world. Not the first bit about sending Elon Musk to Mars, but the rest of it about how we can all be more responsible citizens, responsible apes, where we're responsible for all the apes, the ones in our family and the ones on the other side of the world.
I love that. That's great. Thank you, guys. So thank you so much to everybody for being here with us today. We really appreciate your engagement and the topics. we discussed and your attentiveness throughout the webinar. So a recording of this webinar will be circulated in the coming days to the email address you used to register with. And if you asked a question that we didn't get to today, don't worry, you can still reach out to us using the contact details on our website to try to get some answers. So thank you so much again, and have a wonderful rest of your day, wonderful rest of your week. And like Ian said, try to get in touch with your inner ape. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.